The sofa groaned across the farmhouse floor, and Clara froze. Beneath it was a hat she had never seen before, its edges sharp against the wood. When she told Adam, her boyfriend, his smile faltered. And in the silence that followed, he whispered something that made her blood run cold. Subscribe to the channel and write where you're watching this video from. Clara Myers, 29, a small-town schoolteacher, thought her quiet life was safe. But the man she trusted most had buried a secret inside her own living room. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Clara Myers had built her life on routines. At 29, she didn't dream of luxury or wild adventures. Her happiness lived in small things: chalk dust on her fingers after teaching 3rd grade, the smell of fresh coffee before the first bell, and the walk home past cornfields that turned gold in the late afternoon Sunday. The farmhouse she shared with Adam sat just outside town, where the gravel road ended and silence began. To Clara, the creak of its floorboards was comfort, not annoyance. The sagging porch held 2 rocking chairs, one painted blue, the other white, their chipped edges speaking of summers long gone. She loved that the house felt lived in, as though it carried memory in its walls. Adam had found the place first. He was the one who convinced her it was perfect cheap rent, privacy, a view of the hills. He called it their fresh start. Clara had believed him. She wanted to believe him. That Saturday morning, sun streamed through thin curtains, warming the wooden planks beneath her feet. She hummed as she moved around the living room, pulling rugs aside and dusting corners. Adam sat at the table with a newspaper spread open, coffee steaming in his mug. He wasn't much for housework, but Clara never minded. She enjoyed the quiet rhythm of cleaning. Her eyes caught on the heavy old sofa pressed against the wall. Its faded fabric smelled faintly of tobacco, left by the previous tenants. She had always wanted to shift it, to brighten the space. Planting her palms against the armrest, she pushed with a grunt. The legs screeched across the boards, dust rising like gray smoke. That was when she noticed it. Beneath the scuffed rug, one section of floor sounded wrong. A hollow thud echoed when the sofa shifted farther. Curious, she crouched, brushing dirt from her jeans, and tapped the wood with her knuckles. The sound came back deeper than it should have, like the floor was hiding something below. She paused, knelt lower, and tapped again. Hollow. A laugh slipped from her lips, too quick, too sharp. Bad carpentry, she said under her breath, forcing a grin. She dusted her palms on her shirt, pretending not to care. Across the room, Adam didn't glance up from his paper. "What's that?" he asked, voice casual. "Nothing," she said. "Just these old floors." Still, he didn't look, but Clara's eyes caught the subtle twitch in his hand. His knuckles whitened around the coffee mug, the porcelain groaning faintly under the pressure. He held it like he might crush it. Then, just as suddenly, he loosened his grip, folding the newspaper calmly, as if nothing had happened. Clara told herself she imagined it. She had to imagine it. To distract herself, she dragged the sofa back into place. Dust puffed into her face, scratching her throat. She coughed, waving her hand through the air, then opened a window. Cool September air rushed in, carrying the scent of earth after last night's rain. By afternoon, the moment had almost slipped from her mind. She lost herself in marking essays, red pen looping across spelling mistakes. Adam tinkered with something in the shed outside, the metallic clang of tools drifting faintly through the yard. The house settled into its usual rhythm, calm and ordinary. But when evening fell, Clara found herself lingering in the living room. She stared at the sofa longer than she meant to. The hollow sound tugged at her memory, replaying in her ears like a skipped heartbeat. She told herself she was being silly. It was nothing. Dinner was quiet, filled with the scrape of forks and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Adam didn't bring up the sofa, and neither did she. They spoke instead about groceries, about school children's antics, about the weather. Everything ordinary. Perfectly, stubbornly ordinary. But unease followed her to bed. The farmhouse always carried a medley of scents: old pine wood, musty curtains, the faint sweetness of apples left in a bowl on the counter. Tonight, another smell intruded, subtle at first, creeping beneath the doorframe. Clara wrinkled her nose, sitting up in the dark. It wasn't wood, it wasn't rain, it was sharper, chemical, a mix of bleach and rust. She swung her legs out of bed, padding barefoot down the hallway. The boards cooled her skin, each step heavy in the silence. The smell thickened as she neared the living room. She stopped at the threshold. The sofa loomed in shadows, its fabric sagging, edges soft in the moonlight, streaming through thin curtains. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, breath shallow. The smell was strongest here, right where the sofa Saturday. For the first time since she moved in, the house no longer felt like it belonged to her. And though she told herself she would ignore it, that she would laugh about bad carpentry in the morning, her heart already knew something waited beneath that floor. The faint metallic tang of bleach and rust filled her nose, impossible to dismiss. But soon small details refused to stay hidden. The smell should have faded by morning. That was what Clara told herself as she stood in the kitchen, pouring milk into her cereal. But when she opened the window and the autumn air rolled in, the sharp tang still lingered, faint but stubborn, like rust baked into her tongue. She forced a smile when Adam came down the hall, his shirt wrinkled, his hair mussed. "Morning," she said, brightly enough to sound normal. He kissed her cheek, muttered something about the shed, and disappeared outside with a mug of coffee. The door shut behind him, and she felt the quiet press down harder than it should have. Clara's gaze shifted toward the living room. The sofa sat where it always did, pressed against the wall, sunlight streaking across its faded cushions. Everything looked ordinary, but ordinary was no longer convincing. She set down her spoon, cereal untouched, and walked slowly into the living room. Each step brought back the memory of that hollow thud. Kneeling, she pressed her palm flat against the boards near the sofa. They were warmer than the rest, as though something beneath them carried a pulse. She jerked her hand back, shivering. Her father's voice rose from memory, steady and low, the way he spoke when teaching her how to ride a bike. "If it doesn't feel right, don't ignore it." She exhaled, steadying herself. It was just wood, just uneven boards. But curiosity burned. Clara tapped her knuckles gently. The hollow sound came again, deeper, more metallic, echoing faintly in her bones. This time, the vibration stung her fingertips. A strange ringing tickled her ear, as if the floor itself hummed back at her. Her breath caught. The farmhouse was old, yes, but not like this. "Stop it," she whispered, rising quickly, brushing dust from her jeans, as if the motion itself could erase what she'd heard. "Stop what?" She spun. Adam leaned in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, face unreadable. Clara forced a smile. "Just the floors again. You ever notice how hollow it sounds here?" Adam's lips twitched, but not in a smile. "Clara," he said, his tone laced with sarcasm, "if you keep poking holes in this floor, we'll end up living in the dirt." She laughed nervously, though her chest tightened. "I wasn't—" "Leave it," he interrupted, not harsh, but firm enough to sting. He sipped his coffee and walked past her, setting the mug on the table with a sharp clink. Clara swallowed, her throat dry. It was a small thing, but Adam rarely snapped. His words stayed with her, heavier than they should have been. That night, she found herself in the same spot, drawn against her better judgment. Moonlight spilled across the rug, highlighting the seam where the sofa's leg pressed against the warped plank. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She crouched again, pressing her ear against the boards. At first silence, only the faint tick of the wall clock behind her. Then, a dull thud. Muffled, distant, but unmistakable. Clara jerked upright, breath sharp, heart hammering. She stared at the sofa, waiting, straining. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, as though the house was holding its breath with her. She backed away slowly, her hand brushing the armrest. Her legs trembled, and she nearly stumbled against the doorway. In bed later, she lay stiff as Adam shifted beside her. His arm brushed hers, heavy and warm, but it gave no comfort. What was under there? She closed her eyes, but the sound replayed, hollow and heavy, like something shifting just beneath the floor, and she couldn't help but wonder if Adam already knew. Clara pressed her ear to the floor one last time and froze as the hollow thud echoed back, faint and deliberate, as though it were answering her. By now, denial was no longer enough. The following morning, Clara woke to the sound of rain against the windows. The storm had passed quickly, leaving the sky washed pale and the air heavy. But inside the farmhouse, the smell hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened thicker now, sour-sweet like bleach stirred with rust. She tried to ignore it as she dressed for work, slipping her hair into a braid and buttoning her cardigan. Adam barely spoke, muttering about repairs, vanishing into the yard before she could ask where he was headed. Clara lingered, staring at the living room. The sofa seemed to loom larger than before, its shadow stretching across the wall like something alive. She walked toward it, barefoot on the boards, and crouched again. Her palm pressed flat against the wood. It was cold this time, bitterly so, and the chill spread up her arm until she pulled away with a shiver. Please don't rise to meet me, she thought, clenching her fists. Dust floated in the air, stirred by her breath, and then she saw them thin scratches along the floorboards, curling outward from the sofa legs. Not the kind left by casual moving. These were deep, deliberate, as if the heavy piece had been shoved back and forth too many times to count. She swallowed hard, tracing the grooves with her finger. Her skin tingled at the touch, as though the wood itself remembered every motion. A knock on the door startled her. She jumped, heart racing, and hurried to answer. Standing outside was Mrs. Holloway, the gray-haired widow who lived down the road. She clutched a basket of bread in her wrinkled hands, her eyes sharp beneath her spectacles. "Morning, dear," Mrs. Holloway said, stepping inside uninvited, her gaze sweeping the room. "Thought you could use something fresh." Clara forced a smile, thanking her, but the woman's attention had already settled on the living room. "You know," Mrs. Holloway said slowly, setting the basket down, "I used to hear things from this house when it sat empty. Nights when the wind was still, I'd swear I heard thumping from that very room, like something was trying to get out." Clara froze, gripping the edge of the table. "Thumping?" she asked, voice too thin. The old woman nodded. "Like breathing, almost. But no one lived here then." Her eyes narrowed at the sofa. "Strange, isn't it?" Clara forced a laugh that cracked halfway through. "Old houses make noises." Mrs. Holloway's gaze lingered a beat too long before she finally smiled and patted Clara's hand. "Don't let that man of yours brush you off. Some things aren't meant to be ignored." When the neighbor left, Clara sagged against the counter, her skin clammy. The smell seemed stronger now, clinging to her clothes. That evening, she tried to prove to herself it was nothing. She filled a glass with water and, on impulse, poured a stream slowly across the seam near the sofa. The liquid should have pooled, then slid harmlessly across the wood. But instead, the water vanished between the cracks, drawn down fast as if the boards were thirsty. Clara's eyes widened. She set the empty glass aside, knees trembling as she leaned closer. From the dark seam, a sound rose, a wet, gurgling pull, like lungs struggling to breathe. Her hand clamped over her mouth. She stumbled back, knocking into the coffee table, breath short. The sound faded, but the image burned into her mind. The floorboards drinking, the house exhaling through its cracks. In the silence that followed, Clara swore she could feel it, the faintest shift beneath her feet, subtle but alive. Water gurgled beneath the sofa, vanishing as if the house itself were breathing in. That morning, the ground itself seemed alive. Clara hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, the sound of water gurgling beneath the floor returned, pulling her into shallow dreams, where the house itself rose and fell like a chest breathing. When dawn bled pale light across the curtains, she gave up trying. She pulled on a sweater and padded into the living room, the boards cool under her feet. The sofa sat waiting. For a moment, she stood still, pulse hammering in her throat. She could leave it alone, pretend she had imagined it all, pretend life was normal, but something inside her refused silence. Clara pushed. The sofa groaned across the floor, dust rising in lazy clouds. The rug bunched beneath it, and there, clear as day, lay the outline of a square hatch, its edges carved into the wood. Her breath caught. She crouched, fingers brushing along the seam. Rust bit at her skin where the hinges sat, welded at some point, though the metal now bore faint scratches, as though someone had worked recently to pry it loose. Her throat tightened. Not old, not abandoned, used. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Clara turned. Adam stood in the doorway, hair tousled, shirt unbuttoned halfway, as though he had thrown it on in a rush. His eyes found the hatch instantly, then flicked to her. Neither spoke. Finally, Clara whispered, "Did you know about this?" Adam's jaw flexed, tightening. He said nothing. Her hands shook as she hooked her fingers under the edge of the hatch. She pulled. For a moment, the hinges resisted, shrieking in protest, before snapping upward with a metallic groan. Cold air spilled from below, thick with the stench of damp earth and something chemical. A shiver rippled up her arms. The opening revealed a narrow ladder descending into darkness. Clara swallowed hard, peering down. At the bottom, the beam of light from above caught shelves. Crates stacked neatly, papers bound in twine, tarps folded in bundles. It wasn't a cellar. It was a room. Clara's knees trembled as she descended the first few rungs. The ladder shook with her weight, each squeak echoing too loud. She stepped into the hidden chamber, her breath fogging in the cool, stale air. The shelves were lined with metal boxes, stamped with faded stencils she couldn't read in the half-light. Stacks of folders rested beside them, their edges curled, paper yellowing. Her gaze caught on a large bundle wrapped in a green military tarp, stained dark in patches. With trembling fingers, she pulled the cloth back. A shirt spilled out first brown, torn, soaked, stiff with dried blood. Beneath it, trousers in the same condition, and a pair of boots that looked as though they had been ripped off someone in a hurry. Clara's stomach lurched. She staggered back, colliding with the ladder, one hand clamped over her mouth. Above, Adam's shadow filled the hatch. He hadn't followed her down, but he hadn't moved away either. He just stood there, silent, watching. Clara forced the words through a strangled whisper. "What is this, Adam?" For a long, unbearable moment, nothing. Then his knuckles tightened against the frame of the hatch, whitening just as they had yesterday with his mug. His jaw clenched. Still no answer. Clara's chest burned with panic. Her gaze darted back to the crates, the papers, the blood-soaked cloth. This wasn't junk. This was deliberate, preserved, hidden. A gust of air pushed through the chamber, carrying with it that same metallic tang, stronger now. It filled her nose, made her gag. And then she saw something she had missed before, handwriting scrawled across one of the crates, faded but legible. Her heart stuttered. Names. A list of names, none familiar to her, none belonging to anyone she knew, but each one marked with a date beside it, written in a hand that shook. Some of the dates were years old. Others were recent, too recent. Her eyes darted upward. Adam hadn't moved. His silence pressed down heavier than the air itself. "He already knows," her mind screamed. "He's always known." Her breath trembled as she climbed the ladder back up, needing the light, needing distance. When she pulled herself out, Adam finally spoke, his voice low and tight. "You should have left it alone." Clara's blood ran cold as Adam's words hung in the air, and the hatch gaped open between them, revealing secrets neither of them could now bury again. Would you call for help if you saw the ground breathing? But the discovery refused to stay buried. That night, Clara lay rigid in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling as shadows bent across the plaster. Adam slept beside her, his breathing steady, but the sound didn't soothe her. If anything, it made her skin prickle. Every exhale reminded her of the gaping hatch downstairs, the crates, the blood-stained cloth still pressed into her memory. She rolled to her side, pulling the blanket tight to her chin. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the names scrawled across the crate, names of strangers tied to dates like a ledger of the damned. The clock on the nightstand ticked. 2:12 a.m. Then it stopped. The hands froze mid-tick, the silence hitting like a slap. Clara pushed herself up on her elbows, heart racing. 2:13 a.m. A light flickered in the hallway. Once, twice, then out. The darkness pressed thicker, swallowing the air. She held her breath, listening. From downstairs, the faintest scrape echoed up through the boards. The sofa. Clara's stomach dropped. She slid out of bed, bare feet cold against the floor, and tiptoed to the hallway. Every step felt louder than thunder. She glanced back at Adam, who hadn't stirred. The living room glowed faintly from the moonlight, seeping through the curtains. The sofa stood crooked now, shifted slightly from where she had left it, its shadow stretching long and unnatural across the wall. Clara's breath came fast, sharp, ragged. It moved. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She took one step closer. "Clara." Her blood froze. The whisper came from behind her. Adam stood at the top of the stairs, barely visible in the half-dark. His face was calm, but his voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "You didn't see anything, right?" The words slid into her ears like a blade. Clara's lips parted, but nothing came out. His smile flickered, a brittle, fragile thing that didn't reach his eyes. He waited for her to nod. She forced her head down, barely moving, throat tight. Adam lingered for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared back into the bedroom. Clara stood frozen, the air crushing her chest. Only when his footsteps faded did she let out the breath she had been holding. Her gaze snapped back to the sofa. It groaned, a slow scrape, shifting another inch across the boards without a hand on it. Clara stumbled backward, pressing against the wall. The light overhead flickered once more, then died completely, leaving her in darkness lit only by the cold wash of moonlight. She pressed her palms to her temples, her thoughts spiraling. Every flicker of light felt like the house trying to blink. The smell hit her again, metallic, sharp, pouring out from the floor as if the house exhaled secrets. She gagged, covering her mouth with her sleeve. Her knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself back toward the stairs, each step retreating like a retreat from a battlefield. She slipped into the bedroom, heart pounding, sliding under the covers like a child hiding from monsters. Adam lay still, his back turned, breathing deep and slow. Clara curled on her side, staring at his silhouette. She wanted to believe he slept. She wanted to believe he hadn't whispered those words with that edge of threat. But her body told her otherwise. Hours crawled by, heavy as stone. She never closed her eyes again. As dawn crept through the curtains, Clara realized the sofa downstairs had shifted inches closer to the center of the room, and Adam hadn't mentioned it once. By morning, she was no longer the only one who noticed. Clara didn't remember falling asleep, but she remembered waking. Her body felt leaden, her head foggy, as though she'd drifted through the hours rather than rested. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself coffee, and tried not to look at the living room. But her eyes betrayed her. The sofa had moved. Not a fraction, not an inch, nearly a foot from where it belonged. It sat crooked, like a stubborn piece of furniture shoved into the wrong space. And Adam, who usually rose early, was nowhere to be found. His mug stood empty on the counter, cold. Clara forced herself to leave the house. She couldn't stand another hour inside its walls. The gravel road outside was damp from the night's dew. Across the fence, she saw two neighbors leaning close, whispering with hands cupped around their mouths. When they spotted her, the whispers didn't stop, they sharpened. One of them, a man she recognized vaguely from town, called out, "Everything all right in there?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes flickered with something closer to worry. Clara forced a smile. "Just fine." But when she turned, she caught their words carried low. That house again. By midday, she heard more. At the small grocery, two women huddled by the produce section, voices carrying just enough. Moved in fast, that boyfriend of hers. Nobody really knows where he came from. Strange hours, too, always in the shed or gone at night. Clara lowered her head, clutched her basket tighter, and left without buying half of what she needed. That evening, she sat on the porch steps with her coffee, trying to breathe in the fading light. Chickens clucked on the Holloway property nearby, but she noticed something odd. Their coop door was wide open, yet not a single bird had wandered toward her yard. They kept their distance, circling restlessly at the farthest end of the fence. Mrs. Holloway herself appeared soon after, her shawl wrapped tight, her thin frame bent but steady. She shuffled closer, stopping just at Clara's fence line. "You look tired, dear," the older woman said, her voice kind but weighted. "That house can do that to you." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Holloway's gaze shifted toward the living room window, where the edge of the sofa was barely visible. Her lips pressed tight. "I've lived here 60 years. I seen families come and go." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were sharp. Some left in the night, some left things behind. Always the same story, strange noises, shadows moving where shadows shouldn't. But it wasn't the house doing it. Clara's throat tightened. Then what was it? Mrs. Holloway stepped closer, her hand gripping the fence rail as though bracing herself. Her eyes locked on Clara's. "This ain't natural. Someone put it there, on purpose. And your man—" She hesitated, voice cracking. "Your man knows." Clara's breath caught. "Why would you say that?" The old woman looked at her for a long, painful moment, then lowered her voice to a whisper. "Because I heard the same thumping years ago, when this place sat empty, and it hasn't stopped, not once." Clara felt her skin prickle, goosebumps rising along her arms. Behind her, inside the house, the floor gave a faint groan. Mrs. Holloway flinched at the sound, then pulled her shawl tighter. "Be careful, dear," she said, her eyes wet now. "Secrets like that don't stay hidden without a reason." She turned and shuffled back toward her own porch, leaving Clara trembling on her steps. The sky darkened, clouds swallowing the last light. The air grew heavy again, the smell she'd tried to forget seeping faintly into the evening breeze. Clara rubbed her arms, fighting the chill. She turned toward the house, but for the first time since she'd moved in, the thought of stepping back inside filled her with dread. Mrs. Holloway's warning echoed in her ears. "This ain't natural. Someone put it there." The secret was no longer hers alone. By the next morning, whispers had outpaced Clara's footsteps. At the schoolhouse, she caught her students giggling, their heads bent together. She overheard one boy whisper, "My dad says she lives in the haunted house." Another snickered, "Bet her sofa eats people." She tried to smile it off, but the words clung to her. Gossip had a way of spreading faster than truth in small towns. By the time she reached the market after class, eyes followed her, lingering too long, and voices dipped low as she passed. When she returned home that afternoon, Adam was waiting on the porch, leaning against the railing, his arms crossed. He smiled too quickly, as if plastered on. "You've been busy," he said, his tone clipped. "What do you mean?" People are talking." His eyes flicked to hers, steady and unblinking. "You need to stop giving them reasons." Clara bristled. "I haven't said anything." "Then make sure it stays that way." He turned and walked inside, the screen door slamming behind him. Her chest tightened. She hated how he said it, like she was a child to be corrected. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara sat on the porch steps with a cup of tea, staring at the empty road. The air was too still, the cicadas oddly silent. Across the fence, a group of teenagers dared each other to creep closer to her yard. She heard one whisper, "Bet there's bodies buried under there." Their laughter carried in the dusk, brittle and cruel. She wanted to shout, to tell them to leave, but the words died in her throat. The house already felt like a stage, and she was the unwilling actor. Then headlights. A pair of them cut through the dark, bouncing along the gravel road. A cruiser rolled to a stop at her fence line, dust curling behind it. Sheriff Keller stepped out, a tall man with a thick mustache and a voice like gravel. "Evenin', Miss Myers," he said, tipping his hat. His eyes didn't linger on her. They flicked straight to the house. Clara swallowed hard. Sheriff. He leaned against the fence, casual in posture but sharp in gaze. "Heard some rumors about your place. Kids talkin', folks whisperin'. Thought I'd best check in." Before Clara could answer, the screen door squealed open. Adam stepped out, too quick, too cheerful. "Sheriff, what brings you by?" The man's eyes flicked to Adam, then back to Clara. "Just making sure all's well." Adam chuckled, walking forward with a hand outstretched. "All's fine. Nothing to see here. Come on in. Have a cup of coffee." Sheriff Keller hesitated, then shook his head. "No need for coffee tonight." His voice dropped lower, steadier. "But I will be back, and next time I won't be alone." The words hung heavy in the cooling air. Adam's smile faltered for the briefest moment, but then it returned, wide and stiff. "Of course, Sheriff. Anytime. Anytime." The lawman tipped his hat again, slid back into his cruiser, and rolled away. Taillights glowing red until the road swallowed them. Silence fell. Adam turned slowly toward Clara. His face was shadowed, unreadable in the fading light. "See, even the sheriff thinks it's nothing." But his voice was too tight, too rehearsed. Clara hugged her arms around herself, feeling the porch boards vibrate faintly beneath her feet, as though the house itself disagreed. Sheriff Keller's words echoed in her mind. "I'll be back, and next time I won't be alone." Now, the law stood at her fence line. 2 days later, Clara heard the crunch of tires on gravel before she saw the flashing lights. Sheriff Keller had returned, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 deputies stepped out behind him, carrying long metal cases that clinked when they set them down. Adam appeared on the porch before Clara could even move, his smile too wide, his hand lifted in a wave. "Sheriff, back so soon?" Keller didn't return the smile. His eyes scanned the house, slow and deliberate. "Said I'd be back, didn't I?" One deputy opened a case, pulling out a handheld scanner that whirred faintly when powered on. Clara recognized it from documentary's ground-penetrating radar. Her breath caught. Adam stepped down the porch steps, casual but tense. "This is unnecessary," he said, chuckling lightly. "It's an old house. Of course the floorboards are hollow." Keller's gaze snapped to him. "Then you won't mind if we check." Clara stood frozen, hands trembling at her sides. Adam looked at her then, just for a second, and in his eyes she saw something cold, something warning. Her stomach dropped. The deputies set up the scanner in the living room, positioning it near the sofa. The machine hummed as the antenna swept slowly over the boards. The screen flickered with green and yellow shapes. Abstract but unmistakable, there was something beneath. Clara's throat tightened. One deputy muttered, "Large cavity here. Looks reinforced." Keller's brows knit. He crouched, running his hand along the edge of the sofa, as if he could feel the wrongness through the wood. He leaned closer, inhaled slightly, and his face hardened. "Smell that?" Clara nodded before she realized she had moved. The sharp tang of metal and bleach hung heavy. Adam stood with his arms crossed, his smile stiff as porcelain. "Old plumbing," he offered quickly. "Probably rust." The deputy gave Keller a look, skeptical. Clara swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "There's a hatch," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Under the sofa." Adam's head snapped toward her. The smile cracked. For the briefest second, his mask slipped, and what shone beneath it made Clara's blood run cold. Keller straightened. "We'll take it from here." Adam barked a laugh, stepping forward. "You think you can just tear apart someone's home on rumors? You'll need paperwork." Keller didn't flinch. "Paperwork's coming. Until then, keep your doors open." The deputies packed up, but not before marking the floor with chalk, thin white lines framing the hatch. Clara stared at the marks long after they left, the outline glowing in the dim light like a warning. When the cruiser finally rolled away, silence swallowed the farmhouse. Clara turned to Adam, heart hammering. "You knew," she whispered. He didn't answer. His jaw flexed once, twice. Then he walked into the kitchen, his steps heavy enough to rattle the glasses in the cupboard. Clara stood alone in the living room, staring at the chalk lines. The smell pressed around her like a shroud. Outside, headlights flashed briefly on the road. The local newspaper van parked at the corner. A reporter leaned out, snapping a photo of the farmhouse before speeding away. By nightfall, the headline appeared online, "Farmhouse Secrets Under Investigation." Clara sat at the window, watching the shadows stretch across her yard, knowing that soon everyone would come. Deputies' chalk marks still glowed around the hatch, and Clara realized the next time they returned, they wouldn't just be scanning, they would be digging. "Do you think this is natural, or something far darker?" What the experts saw made their faces turn pale. By the end of the week, the farmhouse no longer felt like Clara's home. It was a staging ground. Sheriff Keller returned, this time with trucks, deputies, and 2 men in plain clothes who spoke little but carried heavy equipment. The neighbors gathered at the fence, whispering, pointing. Children balanced on bicycles, craning their necks. Reporters leaned from their cars, cameras flashing. Clara stood on the porch, clutching her sweater closed against the cold air. Adam stood beside her, too still, too calm. The deputies rolled the sofa aside with practiced ease. The chalk outline now framed the hatch perfectly. Tools sparked as they pried the hinges apart. The sound screeched through the house like metal screaming. Clara winced, covering her ears. With a final crack, the hatch gave way. Cold air rushed up, damp and chemical. Even Keller stepped back, his mustache twitching as he covered his nose. One deputy shone a flashlight down the opening. The beam caught on steel. "Reinforced," the deputy muttered. "Not a cellar, a bunker." The plainclothes men descended first, their boots clanging on the ladder. The crowd outside pressed closer, breath fogging in the autumn air. Clara couldn't move. Her legs trembled as she clutched the porch railing. One of the men called up, "You need to see this." Keller disappeared into the hatch. A long silence followed, broken only by the low hum of machinery outside. Then his voice, grim. "Bring the others." The deputies descended. Clara leaned forward, desperate to see. Adam's hand shot out, gripping her arm. His fingers dug into her skin, firm enough to bruise. "You stay here," he said, voice low, a growl hidden beneath the calm. Her heart pounded, but she didn't argue. Minutes dragged. Then Keller emerged, his face pale, his eyes darker than before. He looked older, heavier, as though the bunker had stolen years from him. "What is it?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer her. Instead, he turned to his men. "Get this place sealed. Nobody in or out." The reporters shouted questions. The neighbors murmured. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears. Finally, one deputy climbed up, carrying a box. He set it on the living room floor and flipped it open. Inside lay yellow documents stamped with faded insignia. U.S. Army, restricted. Beside the papers were sealed canisters. Their lids corroded, their labels unreadable. The smell that poured out was sharp and sour, stinging Clara's eyes. The second deputy carried up a rifle, wrapped in cloth, its barrel marked with unfamiliar serial numbers. "This isn't supposed to be here," Keller muttered, running a hand over his jaw. "This was never supposed to be found." His words sent a ripple through the room. Adam's grip on Clara's arm tightened, his nails pressing crescents into her skin. She looked at him, and for the first time, She saw fear, not surprise, not annoyance, but fear flash across his face before he masked it again. Outside, news vans screeched closer. Reporters shouted, cameras clicked. The farmhouse blazed under a dozen lenses. Clara's knees weakened. Her quiet life was gone. In its place stood something monstrous, something that belonged to history books and battlefields, not her living room. And still, deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Sheriff Keller leaned close to Clara as the reporters shouted and whispered, "Listen to me. Whatever's down there, it's bigger than this town, and it's dangerous." By nightfall, the whole town was talking. It happened fast. One headline in the morning paper, one shaky photo posted online, and suddenly Clara's farmhouse was no longer her own. By dusk, cars lined the gravel road. Reporters in heavy coats clutched microphones, shoving them toward anyone who passed. Neighbors leaned over fences, whispering, retelling stories they swore were true. Screams in the night, shadows under the windows. Soldiers visiting long ago. Clara pressed her hands to her temples, sitting on the porch as lights flashed across her yard. Every camera felt like a weapon. Every whisper felt like a wound. Adam moved among them differently. While Clara shrank, he stepped forward calm, collected, even offering comments to the press. "Old property," he said with a shrug. "Probably just leftover storage. Nothing to worry about." His voice was steady, but his eyes never touched hers. Inside, the living room was worse. Deputies came and went with boxes, hauling sealed containers into trucks. The hatch remained open, covered with tarps, but the smell, sharp and metallic, still leaked through, curling into every corner of the house. Clara tried to close her classroom the next day, but students pressed against her desk with questions. "Miss Myers, did you really find weapons? Did your boyfriend hide them? Did you see ghosts?" She snapped, sharper than she meant, and sent them back to their seats. But their wide eyes haunted her. When she returned home, she found letters slipped under her door. Some warned her to leave town. Others accused her of being part of it. One note simply read, "You shouldn't have looked." That night, banging rattled her windows. Reporters had climbed her gate, shouting her name. Their voices carried into every room, echoing like threat. Clara pulled the curtains shut, shaking, her heart hammering so hard she thought her chest would burst. Adam didn't comfort her. He only watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable, his silence louder than the pounding fists. Hours later, when the reporters finally drifted away, Clara dared to step onto the porch. The night was eerily quiet, the road littered with footprints and camera flashes dropped in the mud. And then she froze. Through the open living room window, she saw Adam. He was inside, standing over the hatch. Slowly, he lifted the tarp, as though checking to make sure it was still there. Then, faint but undeniable, Clara heard it. A sound rising from beneath. Not the groan of boards, not the hum of machinery. A childlike cry. Thin, weak, echoing up through the dark. Clara staggered backward, her hand flying to her mouth. Her heart pounded so loud she thought it might break her ribs. Adam didn't move. He stood, listening. And then he lowered the tarp again, sealing the hatch as if nothing had happened. When he turned toward the window, Clara ducked out of sight, pressing herself against the porch wall. Her pulse thundered. The farmhouse was no longer just a crime scene. It was a prison, and someone was still alive beneath her feet. Clara clutched the porch rail, trembling, as the faint echo of a child's cry lingered in her ears, long after the house had fallen silent. Then came the men who spoke in whispers. By morning, the gravel road was lined, not with reporters, but with black sedans. Their engines idled low, the air around them heavy with exhaust. Men in dark suits stepped out in pairs, their shoes too clean for the muddy path, their eyes hidden behind tinted glasses despite the gray sky. Clara watched from the porch, clutching her coffee mug with both hands to hide their tremble. Adam was already outside, greeting them with a handshake as though he had expected them. The familiarity sent a jolt through her. One man approached, his expression unreadable. "Miss Myers," he said, his voice low and smooth, "we'll be handling this matter now. For your safety and for the safety of this community, you'll need to remain quiet." Clara's mouth went dry. "There's a child down there," I heard. "Ma'am?" His interruption was sharp but calm, like a blade slid beneath her ribs. "There is nothing down there. Do you understand?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. Inside, the agents moved with precision. They covered the hatch with reinforced panels, sealing it as if it had never existed. They loaded boxes into vans without labels. Their conversations were murmured, coded, never lingering long enough for her to catch more than fragments. Relocate, containment, unreported inventory. The smell of bleach returned stronger than ever, filling the rooms until Clara gagged. One agent placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the kitchen as if she were a guest in her own house. Adam followed close, too close. He hadn't said a word to her since the night before, but his silence now felt complicit. When she finally looked at him, really looked, she saw not fear but something worse, acceptance. "You knew they'd come," she whispered, voice breaking. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. He only lowered his eyes and said, "It's better this way." The words hollowed her out. By evening, the sedans were gone. The house left quieter than before. But the silence was suffocating, the air thick with the residue of secrets scrubbed clean. The hatch was hidden again, buried beneath panels and tarps, but Clara still felt it under her feet, like a second heartbeat in the floor. As night fell, she stood at the window, staring at the empty road. That was when she saw it. A figure at the fence line, still, watching. Too far to make out a face, but close enough that the presence pricked her skin like needles. She blinked, and it was gone. Her phone rang then, sharp and sudden. She snatched it up, breath quick. Static crackled on the line, followed by a single phrase in a voice she didn't recognize. "Stop digging, Clara, or you'll regret it." The call ended. Her hands shook so badly, she nearly dropped the phone. She turned toward the hallway and froze. Adam stood there, framed in the dim light, his expression unreadable. "Who was that?" he asked softly. Clara's pulse thundered. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Outside, the wind rattled the panels covering the hatch, and Clara swore she heard a faint voice beneath them, muffled, pleading, alive. Every shadow now felt like a watcher. Clara no longer felt like she lived in her own home. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of light carried weight. She kept the curtains drawn, but it didn't matter, she knew. Eyes lingered just beyond them. At the grocery, she caught sight of the same black sedan parked across the street, engine running. At the school, she noticed a man in a gray coat she'd never seen before, standing by the playground fence, smoking but never taking his eyes off her. Her phone rang at odd hours. When she answered, there was only silence, then a click. Sometimes static. Once, she thought she heard faint breathing. At night, her dreams blurred into reality. She'd wake to find the lights flickering in the hall, their glow stuttering like an eye trying not to close. Every flicker of light felt like the house trying to blink. The stains came next. One morning, Clara noticed a dark mark spreading across the boards near the sofa, thin as a vein. By afternoon it had widened, a jagged crack bleeding into the wood. No matter how many times she scrubbed, it remained damp to the touch. She pressed her hand against it. It pulsed. Her stomach lurched. If fear had a smell, it was the floor beneath me. She staggered back, nearly tripping over the coffee table. That evening, Adam returned late. His clothes smelled of earth and oil, his hands stained, though freshly washed. He set his boots neatly by the door, as though nothing were wrong. "Where were you?" Clara asked, her voice thinner than she wanted. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Out. Don't ask questions you don't want answered." Her chest tightened. "Adam." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Stop asking questions, for your own good." His words were calm, but his eyes glimmered with warning. She felt her breath shorten, the room shrinking around her. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. She thought of calling Keller, thought of driving away, thought of telling someone, anyone. But every shadow in the room leaned closer. Every hum of the refrigerator or tick of the clock twisted into a threat. She was being watched. She knew it. In the early hours, she wandered into the living room, her bare feet quiet on the boards. The stain on the floor had spread wider, curling like fingers beneath the sofa. The air was damp, metallic, thick enough to coat her throat. Her hand shook as she reached for the lamp. The bulb flickered once, twice then went out, leaving her in darkness. From the hatch beneath, muffled through the panels, she thought she heard a voice. Not the cry of a child this time. Deeper, urgent. Her knees weakened. She pressed her back to the wall, her chest heaving. Behind her, footsteps sounded softly in the hall. Adam. He appeared in the doorway, his silhouette cutting the room in two. He stared at her, silent. The only light came from the thin slit of moon through the curtain, catching his eyes in a way that made her stomach twist. In that instant, she knew. He was waiting for her to make a choice, to keep quiet, or to betray him. Clara met Adam's gaze, her heart pounding, realizing he already knew she was standing on the edge of betrayal. If this happened to you, what would you do? And then the last secret broke free. Clara waited until Adam's breathing deepened that night, slow and steady, before slipping out of bed. She dressed in silence, her hands trembling as she pulled on her sweater. The moonlight spilling through the window was pale and cold, but it was enough to guide her. She moved barefoot down the hall, each creak of the floorboards like a gunshot in the silence. Her heart pounded so loud she feared it might wake him, but she couldn't stop. Not after the stains, not after the whispers, not after the childlike cry that still echoed in her head. The living room smelled stronger now, earth and metal, soaked into the walls. The tarps the agents had left over the hatch lay crooked, as though someone had disturbed them. Clara knelt, fingers trembling as she pulled the covering back. Her stomach lurched at the rush of cold air that escaped. She climbed down the ladder. The bunker seemed larger now, the shadows stretching deeper than she remembered. Dust motes swirled in her flashlight beam. Shelves of crates loomed on either side, their labels blurred with age. She moved slowly, her breath clouding in the damp air. And then she saw them. A stack of folders shoved beneath a crate, half buried in dirt. She pulled one free, the paper brittle, the ink faded. Inside were photographs. Her hands shook as she flipped through them, faces of men in uniform, some masked, some not. In one, Adam stood among them, younger but unmistakable, his arm slung around another soldier. They were smiling. Behind them, a pit yawned in the earth. The next photo showed bodies, rows of them, covered in tarps, identical to the one she had opened before. Clara's breath hitched. She shoved the photo back into the folder, bile rising in her throat. Another folder bore a stamp, confidential, property of U.S. Army. She opened it, eyes scanning frantic lines. Operations, relocations, unmarked sites, dates spanning decades. Her vision blurred, her mind refusing to process the scale. This wasn't just a stash. It was a record, a program, and Adam was part of it. Her knees weakened, her hand bracing against the crate for balance. The sound of her own breathing seemed deafening. Then, footsteps. She froze, her flashlight beam shaking across the wall. The sound was deliberate, heavy, echoing down the ladder. Clara! Adam's voice, low and steady, filled the chamber. She spun, her stomach plunging as his silhouette appeared at the top of the ladder. His face emerged slowly from shadow, calm but cold, his eyes glinting in the thin light. "You shouldn't be down here," he said. Her voice cracked. "What is this, Adam? What have you done?" He didn't answer. He climbed down, each rung creaking under his weight, the sound stretching into her bones. When he reached the floor, he stood only feet from her, the files still clutched in her hands. She backed away, but the crates pressed against her spine. Adam's expression didn't change. He looked at her like she was already a decision made. Clara's hand fumbled for her phone. She dialed 911, her thumb trembling against the screen. The call connected. A faint crackle of static filled her ear. 911, what is your emergency? Her voice broke into a whisper. "Please, I need help. My boyfriend, he..." The line went dead. Her screen turned black. The silence after was unbearable. Adam stepped closer, his voice low, almost tender. "There's no help coming, Clara. Not for this. Not for me. Not for you." The bunker walls closed in, as Adam's footsteps echoed closer, and Clara realized the man she loved was not just hiding secrets, he was the secret. But some secrets never truly stay buried. Clara didn't remember how she made it out of the bunker. One moment, Adam's voice had filled the chamber, low and steady, and the next she was running, bare feet slapping against the boards as she clawed her way into the cold night air. She didn't stop to grab shoes. She didn't stop to look back. Gravel tore at her soles as she stumbled down the road, her phone clutched in her hand, useless and dead. Headlights appeared in the distance, Sheriff Keller's cruiser. She waved both arms wildly, sobbing when the brakes squealed and the door flew open. Keller caught her by the shoulders as she collapsed into him, words tumbling from her in fragments. Bunker, files, Adam. That night blurred into questions and flashing lights. Deputies flooded her home, agents returned, but this time Adam wasn't there to greet them. He was gone. They arrested him 2 days later, or so they told her. She never saw it herself. They said he was in custody, that she was safe, that she should move on. But weeks later, As Clara sat in her new apartment 2 towns over, a knock came at her door. No one stood outside, only a folded slip of paper pushed beneath the frame. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "You never should have moved that sofa." Her knees buckled. She dropped the note, heart racing so violently it made her sick. Adam was gone from the record. No booking, no trial, no mention of his name in the papers. It was as if he'd never existed, but Clara knew better. She carried on, teaching her students, pretending at normalcy. She bought a second-hand chair instead of a sofa for her living room. She told herself she was moving forward, but at night, when the apartment settled and the silence pressed too heavy, she sometimes swore she heard it, the faint scrape of furniture moving across the floor, the hollow thud beneath her feet, the whisper of her name in a voice too familiar. Clara's life never returned to quiet. The farmhouse was sealed, but its memory clung to her. She no longer trusted stillness. She no longer trusted anyone who smiled too easily. Neighbors told their versions of the story. Some claimed it was all government business. Some said Clara exaggerated. Others whispered she had uncovered something that would outlive them all. Reporters tried to push the story, but it was buried within weeks, replaced by other headlines. Even now, Clara sometimes wakes to the scrape of wood on wood and wonders if Adam has already found another sofa.